Hey everyone, it's Nate here. Today we're going to work with APIs to collect data for your next data science project. A few months ago, I made a video outlining the only data science project you need to do. And in that video, I talked about the data science project from start to finish. And at the start of that project is collecting data. And I outlined and detailed how important it is to work with APIs to collect your data for your data science project versus, importing data from a CSV into your notebook versus collecting data from a database. So today I want to show you how to actually pull data from an API, specifically using Python to pull data from the YouTube API, and specifically using the requests library that's found in Python. So I'll explain how to work with an API. We'll pull the data, we'll look through the JSON response that we get, and then we'll save all of this data into a Pandas DataFrame. And in the next video, I'll show you guys how to actually save the data that you've collected from the API to a database, basically creating a data pipeline that you can continuously update. And of course, we're gonna do this all programmatically with good software engineering skills, so your code is concise and it's clear and it doesn't look like some 10-year-old wrote it. And an important note, this video is not going to be specifically about how to work with the YouTube API. What I want to do is talk about how to work with APIs in general. So I'll just make sure that all of the libraries we're using and all the techniques we're using can be used for all API services. And that's actually a big reason why I chose to use the request library. Okay, with that being said, let's start this project. Let's start coding. And before we go to the transition, if you like this type of content, please subscribe to this channel. All right, thanks guys. All right guys, so I'm gonna be working with Google Colabs, as you see here on the screen, which is basically Jupyter Notebook. So if you prefer Jupyter Notebooks, you can work on that platform instead. I just prefer Colabs in this case because it's really easy to spin up and then all my work gets saved in my Google Drive. So the first thing we want to do is let's just import the libraries that we're going to be working with. So there are three libraries. The libraries are the request library, which is basically a library that is going to allow us to make API calls. Then obviously there's the Pandas library because we're going to save our data into a Pandas data frame. And then there's a time library, and I'm going to explain what we're going to do with that later on. So the next step here is to grab our API keys. Like I said in the intro, we're going to be working with the YouTube API. So we need a API key that will allow us to make these API calls to YouTube. So like I said, I'm not going to be extensively covering the YouTube API because I want this video to really just be talking about APIs in general and how to work with them and collect data from them. But if you want to follow along with me and you want to actually pull data from the YouTube API, there's this resource here on the web that I'll link in the description. Basically, it tells you how to get an API key from YouTube. You need to basically create or log into your Google account, go to the developers.google.com site, and then you create a new project, and then you can grab an API key from that project. It's actually a very simple process. So once I have my API key, I just put it right here and I'm saving that API key in a variable called API key. Now what I want to do in this project is grab all my videos that I have in my channel, and then what I'm going to do is just grab the metrics from each video. So metrics like view count, likes, dislikes, things like that, I'm going to be grabbing from the YouTube API. So what I need is my channel ID. So I have my channel ID right here. It's actually very easy to find your channel ID. All right, so these two parameters will be used to make my API call. I'm just setting up the variables right now. So the next thing I want to do is show you guys how easy it is to make an API call and to grab data from that call. All right, so we're going to do a test run here. So let's quickly make an API call. So I'm going to save the output of that call into a variable called response. I'm going to be using the request library that you see up here, import requests, and then I will use the get method. The get method basically is a function that will make the API call and grab data from that call. So what I want to pass through this get method is the location of that API call, of that API, which is basically just the URL. And for testing purposes, just to show you guys how this works, we're going to grab data from the GitHub API. So the location of the GitHub API is api.github.com. This is passed through as a string in single quotes here. And then I'm going to add this JSON method to the end of this request, which will basically return a JSON object in the response. So what is a JSON object? What is a JSON file? It's basically a very popular data file sent over as a JavaScript object, and it contains all of your data, usually in an attribute value pair, and I'll show you what that looks like after we make that response. But JSON objects are basically a very popular and common data file type. You definitely need to know how to work with these JSON objects. All right, I'm just gonna run this code here. All right, so let's see what that response looks like. This is the JSON object here. It starts with a curly bracket, curly brace, and what you have are attributes or keys, and then the value of that attribute or key. So this is the data that we get making an API call. It's really that simple. Most of the work with dealing with APIs is actually passing through the correct URL with the right parameters. We actually don't have any parameters here, and I'll show you how complicated and difficult it could be working with these parameters. And second, the other hard thing about working with APIs is parsing through the data that you collect and then saving it in the right way. That actually can take quite a bit of time, and it could be a little bit difficult. All right, so I'll also show you how to do that when we work with the YouTube API. All right, so this information is not really interesting. Again, it was just for testing purposes. All right, so now let's work with the YouTube API. So what I'm gonna do is just delete this, and then instead of just typing in the URL here, we're just gonna have a variable called URL, and I'll build the URL in this URL variable here. All right, so the first thing and what makes working with APIs kind of hard is that there's a lot of documentation that you're gonna have to read through to be able to build out the URL and grab and collect the data that you want. So because we're working with the YouTube API, I have the YouTube data API reference document here. And so after reading the entire document, I am going down here to the left. I'm going down to search. And then if I go to overview here, or if I go to list, it shows me the HTTP request get URL that I need, right? So basically this is the URL that we're gonna need to make the API call, right? So one thing I'll do just to start it off is copy this and put it into the URL variable here, but that's just the root of the URL. We need to build parameters because what I'm trying to do is find the videos in my channel, basically list them out and find the view counts, the number of likes, dislikes, all of that information so that I can save it into a Pandas data frame. So this link isn't really going to get me there. I need to specify specifically what I want and what kind of data I want from the API. And so in order to do this, again, we need to go through the document, but one of the parameters that we need to pass through this URL up here is this part parameter. And then there are a few other optional parameters like channel ID, which will be my channel, maximum results, the ordering of the results itself, and the page token. So after reading all of this, I kind of have figured out these are some of the parameters I need. But again, like I don't want to make this video just about working with the YouTube API. So whatever API you're going to be collecting data from, what you need to do is read through the document and figure out what parameters you need to pass through to collect the data that you want. So this is what it looks like when you have a properly built URL. All right, so let me go through this one by one. Again, we have the root URL here. We are passing through to the right of this question mark. We are passing through the API key. So I have key equals and then my API key here. So I'm basically authenticating into the YouTube API. I have my channel ID. So I have this ampersand sign here. So it's basically my API key and my channel ID that's going to be passed through. And so this variable channel ID corresponds to this variable here. And then when we went through the document, I showed you that there was a parameter called part. And so what I'm asking for is the snippet information and the ID information. Again, if we go back to the document, this snippet information here and the ID information, we will get get all of this information back. Video ID, channel ID, playlist ID, publish stat, channel ID, title, description, thumbnails, channel title, all of that information will be collected. So that's basically what you're building out in this URL here. You're specifying exactly what you want to collect from the YouTube API. And then I have just some optional parameters just to make things easier for me. I'm adding this sorting parameter here because I want to sort by date. I want to sort the results by date. And then I want a maximum result of 10,000. So because I don't have 10,000 videos, obviously, but I'm just putting a big max there because I just want to collect all of the videos and I want to ensure that I'm not limited by the maximum result parameter. And then I have this page token here because when I read the document, it basically said that this search might have several pages. And so the page token will then allow me to go to the second page, grab all that information, and then go to the third page and grab all that information until all of my videos have been collected. So the last thing I forgot to do is just add the page token and what that parameter is. For now, it's going to be blank, but later on, I'll show you actually how to use the page token parameter. All right, so I have the URL all built out now. I'm passing it through to the request library here. The get method has this URL, has this entire URL here. And again, we are specifying that we want a JSON output and everything gets saved in the response. All right, so now let's go through the response. All right, so let's go through the response, which is a JSON object, to try to understand what it's giving us, right? Because we're gonna have to save this data somehow. So if we go through this response, it opens up with a curly brace, curly bracket. You see this E tag here, which is basically, again, this is an attribute and then or a key, and then this is the value for that key or attribute. And so now we have items here, and then it opens up with a solid brace, a solid bracket. And then what you see is essentially all of my videos, right? You see the kind here is a YouTube video. This is the channel title, my description for that video, and then the title of the video itself, right? And then here is what up here again is the video ID. So the actual unique identifier for this video, step-by-step approach to solving any data science SQL interview question. All right, and so as you kind of go down, it just lists all of my videos that I've published on my channel. And so it's actually quite a bit. I think I have, I don't know, like 95 videos or something like that. And then as you go all the way down, things should then start to close up. So at the very end, what we're seeing is the closing of the items attribute, the closing of the items key, right? It started off with a solid bracket opening up and now it's closing this. So between the solid bracket contains all of my videos and all of the information that I want. It's in the items key. So what I've identified by scrolling down and reading through the JSON object is the key that I need that holds all of my video information. And that key again is this items attribute items key. So what I can do just to get rid of everything else is just say items. And if I just look at the response for items, what I get is the start of the solid bracket. And then if I go all the way down, I'm sure I'll get the closing bracket. So this is all the information that I want. So now let's start to parse through this information, this array, and grab all of the information we want and then save it to variables. All right. So because I have like 55 videos listed in this array, I want to just go one by one and grab that video information. And obviously I'm going to have to write a for loop, but before I actually write the for loop, let's write what would actually be in that for loop. So let's go through the first video, which would be in position 0 here. So I just call the 0 position, which is really the first position. And it gives us the very first video that I have, the latest video that I have, right? Step-by-step approach to solving any data science interview question. So the first thing I want to save that I'm interested in is this video ID here. I actually want to save this value here. So how do I do that? How do I navigate to this value? So in order to do that, I think what I need is to specify that I want the ID. So this will take me to the second row here. And within this ID key, the second row, I just want the video ID. So I'm going to specify that as well. So video ID. And then that actually should give me the value. So if I run this, I should get this value, which I do here. So that's how you basically navigate through the array that you have up here. So I'm just going to save this into a variable called video ID. And so if I run this again, it should give me exactly what I expect, the video ID for this video here. All right, so that's the first thing I want to grab. I also want to grab the title of the video, which is right here. It's saved in the snippet key here. So what I'm going to do is now just specify the snippet key and then the title key and then grab this title here. So that's going to look like this. And so if I output the video title, I get something that looks like this. Right? That's exactly what I want. And so just because I've built this project out before, some of my videos have this symbol here. I don't really want that saved. So I'm just going to do a replace. Whenever there's this symbol, just replace it with a blank. All right. And so turn this whole thing into a string as well. It's not going to really do anything to this video title, but if I run it, you should see the exact same title. And so the next thing I want to do is grab the publish date or the upload date, and that is at published at, and that date is located under this key published at. All right, so exact same technique. We're gonna just traverse through the array until we get the value we want. You see here that I have the date and then I have a timestamp and then a time zone. So what I'm gonna do is just pick or just save the actual date and throw the time zone away. So what I'm gonna do is use a split method to just split on the T and save everything to the left. So that looks like this. Split on the T, save the left-hand side. All right, so now if I run this, I get adjusted date. So that's basically how you save all of the information. So I've just also consolidated the code a bit so that it's all in one block. So the next thing we want to do is actually collect all of this information for every single one of these videos. We have all of the videos in this array here in this response items. So this is video 1, this is video 2, for example. So we need to go through each video and collect that information. In order to do that, we need to create a for loop. So that's relatively easy. What we can do is just create a for loop here where we have 4 video in response items. Response items, again, is essentially the array of the data that we have. Video is a placeholder variable where it's going to go through each video in the array and grab that information. So most of the work has already been done here. What we need to do is replace this, which is the actual video, with this placeholder variable in the for loop called video. So if we do that, we basically have what we're seeing right now, just video here as it goes through the for loop. The last thing I want to add in the for loop is just some logic that will pick out YouTube videos. So kind equals YouTube video, because I want to make sure that the information that I'm collecting is a YouTube video and it's not something else like a search result or whatever it could be. So what I'm going to do is add this if statement here that basically will look at kind and make sure that the value in kind is YouTube video, just like what we're seeing up here. So after just refactoring the code so that it's properly formatted, this is what my final for loop looks like. So the last thing I want to do is just test out this for loop. I'm going to print out the video ID, the video title, and the date just to make sure that it works. So if we run this for loop, we should basically get the video ID here, the title of the video, and then the date it was uploaded. And we'll do that for all of the videos that I have in my channel. All right, so it looks like it actually worked. So collecting all this information is great, but it's not very interesting. So what I'm also interested in collecting are view counts, likes, dislikes, comment counts for each video that I have, right? So in order to actually do that, I need to make a second API call because the data that I've collected in this API call doesn't have any of those metrics that I'm interested in, all right? So in the interest of time and in the interest of not having a lot of duplicate information, I've already shown you how to make an API call. So I'll leave it up to you to figure out a way to make the second API call. Try to make that API call in the same way I just did and collect all of that information. So if you are successful in making that second API call, it should look something like this. The URL, I'm naming the variable URL video stats for video statistics. The URL is essentially this string right here. It's going to the Google API's YouTube version 3 videos section, not the search section where we were at last time. And then the parameters that we're using, we're passing through the video ID, and then we are grabbing the statistics from part equals statistics, and then we're passing the API key. So in order for this API call to be successful, we actually need to know what the video ID is, which means that it needs to take place, or this this API call needs to take place after we make the first API call, right? Because we need to grab all of that video information. So after we make that API call, it's saved again as a JSON object. And so if we are able to go through the JSON object, through the array, we can pick out view count, the like count, the dislike count, and the comment count. Okay, so all of that is saved in these variables here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put all of this code in the for loop, because I just mentioned that we need to have the video ID first before we can make the second API call. So it needs to be in this for loop, and it's going to look like this. All right, so I have the second API call right here, and then what I'm doing is I'm just printing out all of the outputs that I have here just to test that the for loop is actually working. So if you integrated the second API call successfully, your final for loop should look something like this. What I'm going to do is actually delete these print outputs here. So I'm going to have essentially 7 columns in my Pandas data frame, because we have video ID is 1, title, date, view count, like count, dislike count, and comment count. So I want to save all of this information for every single video that we have. So that's going to be 7 columns. So the first thing we want to do is actually create an empty Pandas data frame with those 7 columns. So that would look like this. We have, again, 7 columns here. They basically correspond to the 7 variables that we've collected. And we are naming the data frame df. This actually needs to be executed before the for loop. So I'm going to put it up here, and then I'm going to run this so that we have an empty data set. And if I output the data frame, we have these 7 columns without any data inside of it. So now the question is, how do you actually save the information, save the data into the Pandas data frame? For that, we can use the append method, which will basically take all of this information we're saving and then append that or save that into the Pandas data frame. So we're going to save the data in the Pandas data frame at the end of this for loop here, and it's going to basically look like this. So we have df is equal to df.append, and what this append method needs is essentially the column name of the data frame and the variable or the data itself that we want to save. So the first one is going to be the video ID. So what that's going to look like is this. We're going to start off with a curly bracket, and then we have the video ID, which corresponds to the column of the Pandas data frame here. And we need to pass a value to this column, which is saved in video ID. So I'm just going to copy and paste that here. And then the next thing will be video title, and then upload date, view count, like count, dislike count, and comment count. So if I do that, it would look something like this. Here we have all 7 metrics saved, and the last parameter I'm just going to pass is just to ignore the index of the Pandas data frame. So then I will close off this data frame here. And so that's how you save all of this information to a Pandas data frame. All right, so now with the for loop finished, let's test this out. I'm just going to run this code block here. It'll take a few minutes. And because we saved everything in a Pandas data frame, let's just output the first 5 rows of it. And so now we have all of our data in this Pandas data frame. So we're essentially done building out this notebook that connects to the YouTube API, grabs data, and saves it to a Pandas data frame. There's not a lot of code here, but what we can do next is implement a good software engineering fundamentals and clean up this code a bit. In particular, what I don't necessarily like about this for loop here is that we are making a second API call to grab video statistics here and then processing that. And at the same time, we are also parsing through the data from our first API call. And it's all kind of mixed into this for loop. So good software fundamentals shouldn't have this code kind of all mixed and jumbled together. What we can do is break the code up into functions, and that's what we're going to do next. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new code block right below building this data frame here. And I'm just going to take this second API call here where we're grabbing the video statistics, and I'm just gonna put it up top here. All right, so I'm gonna now make this into a function of its own. I'm gonna call this function get video details and pass through the video ID. The video ID will come from my first API call here, and it'll actually come from this video ID variable here. And then lastly, add this return at the end, because once we process the video statistics, we want to just return all of the counts back into this for loop here. All right, so what we can do here now is call this function in this for loop. So we're gonna call get video details, and we're gonna pass through the video ID that we get from this line of code here, we're going to pass it into this function up top. So the output of get video details is going to be these count metrics here. So all I'm going to do is copy and paste these variables into this for loop here. These variable names actually match up to the variable names that I have when I'm saving the data into a Pandas data frame. So everything kind of matches up. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is create one more function with the first API call. The first API call is at the top here, right here, and we're just going to grab this and bring it down to where our for loop is. So it's going to be above our for loop. So we're making the API call here, and then we are grabbing all of the data in this response variable, and then we are processing that data in this for loop here and saving everything in the Pandas database. That whole thing, that whole workflow could be one function. So we'll call this function get videos, and all we need to do is just reformat the code. So basically what we need to do is just pass the Pandas data frame into this function so that it can save the data here. So this function is almost complete. We are passing a Pandas data frame into this function. This Pandas data frame is going to have all of our video information. So we make the API call here. So after this API call, we jump right into this for loop. And sometimes in my experience, we jump into the for loop way too quickly before all of the data from the API is actually collected in the response. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to make use of this sleep function here, sleep method from our time library. And I'm just gonna say like, wait 1 second before you jump into the for loop. And that will give it enough time so that all the data from the API makes it into the response variable here. And the last thing we want to do is return the data frame. And so both of our functions are created. So with this function done, we're basically done building out our notebook. So let's test everything. What I'm going to do is bring the creation of the data frame down here. This is going to be our main. And so now I'm just going to call the function. So this data frame is going to be created, and then it's going to be passed through this function here. And then this function is going to make the first API call. It's going to process the video data. And then once it grabs the video ID, it makes a second API call here, get video details. Then we process all of the video details, grabbing the view counts, like counts, dislike counts, comment counts. We save it all here in this first function. And then we save everything into the Pandas data frame. So once we get that, let's see what we get. So we get a Pandas data frame. It has the video ID, the title of the videos in my channel, upload date, and all of the video counts. So that's basically it. That's how you grab data from an API and save it to a Pandas data frame. So as a data scientist, you're going to be expected to know how to work with APIs and grab data from APIs and then work with the data that you have. So to break it down in steps, what we did today was work with a Python library called the request library. This is a standard library that can work with all APIs, and it allows you to make API calls. So we made a call to the YouTube API. We passed a URL to the API to specify exactly what data we wanted. We had to read the documentation carefully to figure out how to build the URL correctly. We collected the data as a JSON object and we parsed through it, saving all of the information that we cared about into a Pandas data frame. And then lastly, we cleaned up the code and we applied good software engineering fundamentals. The next step in the data science process is to take your Pandas data frame and then upload that data into a database. That's going to be the next video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you like content like this. If you have any comments or questions about anything we covered in today's video, just leave a comment in the comments section. Okay, so until next time, have a good one, guys.